Okay. And of course, we'll wait like just a few minutes for people to show up. We can all collect our thoughts.
I can still talk about the next Fast and Furious movie.
That's right. Do you want to give us your review?
It's a doozy.
I like had to rate it on Letterboxd, and I was like, this transcends ratings. They drive to space. Vin Diesel pulls a building down, and it takes him almost no effort, while also fighting off 50 men.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
There's a character who died in a previous movie who returns, and they have a flashback to his car exploding with him in it, and they were like, how did you survive? And he's like, oh, Mr. Nobody, who like gives the missions, he has a way of making things happen, and that's it.
I love that like they thought it was significant enough they had to address it, but they put no effort into it. Like
they're like, someone's gonna ask about this. We don't have to explain it. We just have to acknowledge it.
Exactly.
They also drive on a bridge that is actively falling, so it's like falling while they're on it. And they make it up, and then Vin Diesel and his girlfriend drive off the cliff, somehow attach the like rope of the bridge to their car and swing across the chasm.
Oh,
as you do.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Wow.
It sure is the most movie ever.
It's the most movie.
I think they just need to accept that, like, they just need to start marketing it as like basically superhero movies, because like,
they're the Avengers now. They outdrove landmines.
Oh my god.
It's wild. Wow.
Last thing I'll say is a giant magnetic car.
Oh.
That they drive through the streets of Scotland, and cars just keep slamming into it, and washing machines and so on. It's wonderful.
Amazing.
I mean, you have to admire their commitment to the theme, which is just the most.
Yeah. Every time they sit down to make a movie, they're like, what can we do that's more?
Yeah.
Well, they've already been underwater. What if we took them to space?
Like, wouldn't you love to see how like a storyboard meeting goes? Like someone's like, what if we drove upside down? And they're like, you're fired. We did that last week.
Shut up. Shut up. There's one character who keeps going, shouldn't we be dead now? Or like, look at us, not a scratch. And everyone's like, shut up. Don't be stupid here.
No one asked for your realism.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I highly recommend it.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we have some people joining already. I figure we'll kind of give it another minute as we transition into the discussion here. Let's see. I figure we can go ahead and just start with like introductions, and then by the time we get to the book, I think that'll be a good time. So hi everybody. My name is Kara. You obviously know where my channel is because that's where we are. This is the live show for, I always do this, I held it up on the wrong side. Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope, which was, of course, our Past It Classics pick. And we're obviously doing this in the middle of the month because it was a chunky boy. So we wanted to give people plenty of time to read. So we're going to start out with our hosts introducing themselves. Let's start with Taylor this time. I don't remember who we did last time.
Okay, awesome. So hi everyone, I'm Taylor from Page Screen Taylor. My channel is on a half hiatus, but I still do live shows. And when I do post videos, I post videos about all genres, fantasy, romance, sci-fi, classics. So yeah, maybe one day I'll make my return. I keep promising months, so I'm not going to be specific this time.
Well, and you're also doing some panels. Nina said that she loved your panel today, so check that out as well.
Thank you so much, Nina.
Yeah. Julia, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Julia. My channel is called Shakespeare and Such. And if Taylor's on a half hiatus, I think I'm on like a quarter hiatus. So you can count on me somewhat reliably for TBRs and live shows, and that's about it right now. Life
That's
is
all
busy.
right.
I just moved. If
Yes.
you've been watching, you're like, where are you? But I'm excited to be talking about this book today. So
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So, like I said, I'm Kara, and I also want to mention that my lovely co hosts are already linked in the description. So, if you want to follow them, which you should, they are there. And yeah, like I think probably most of you have heard our introductions quite a few times at this point, but I read all kinds of things, all kinds of genres and age ranges. That's something I'm very passionate about, is reading widely. And obviously that includes classics, and we are all very excited to discuss this book. There's like so much to talk about here. Um, so before we get into general thoughts, I do want to do a quick content note warning. Excuse me, I meant to pull this up before we started and I did not remember. So let me go ahead and do that. Just so you kind of know um, what to expect from the discussion. And if there's anything that goes beyond that, I will try to give a warning for that specifically before we get into that in case you would like to skip that. So I really meant to have this queued up. I'm sorry, guys.
no worries.
Starting off great, right?
I'm looking at all our shirts because I feel like we're very like tropical, like we're on vacation right now.
Very
with all
floral, yeah.
There are some vacations in the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh
So,
boy, are there.
yeah. Okay, so the ones that I think will likely come up based on my plan for the discussion, we're going to talk about sexism, infertility might come up, some ableism, domestic violence, and attempted murder. There are a couple others that are present in the book, but I don't think I don't anticipate those coming up in discussion. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into general thoughts. Julia, would you like to start this time?
I would love to start. So I definitely had some thoughts while reading this. But I really loved it. I actually listened to it as an audiobook, but like as I was going along, I was like, yes, like not even as I was listening, but like I kept going back and forth to mark stuff. And I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. I had a great time with this book. Like there are a few things I would change, but it like kept my interest for 800 odd pages, which, you know, the Three Musketeers couldn't do. So,
Yep.
Oh boy.
and like the characters were fascinating. I loved the women. Spoilers. I'm just going to be talking about the women this whole time because all of them are iconic.
That's like a huge chunk of my discussion. So go for it.
And what was my other thought? Oh, and there's just so many great quotes too, like some beautiful writing. And I think honestly, the synopsis for like the next book in his Palliser novels doesn't sound as interesting, but I'll probably try it because, yeah, I loved this one.
Taylor, go ahead.
So I also found this interesting, and I don't know if I would give it 4.5 stars. There was one plot line that I was kind of bored with, but the other two, I'm here for the mess. I'm here for the drama.
Love triangles as far as the eye can see. You know?
I know.
So I'm like sort of hovering between a 3.5 and 4 star. I usually wait until the end of our discussions to rate these because sometimes I need to get my thoughts together. But I gotta say, love the mess. And the women were great too, and the writing was excellent, but the mess.
The mess.
Just reading it like, oh my god.
Yeah.
He said that?
Yeah.
I'm supposed to. There we go. I had my horrible little Knott's Berry.
I love that. I can't believe you brought props. That's amazing. Yeah, so I think I'm sitting at like a 3.5 stars right now. Like I am very conflicted because there were a lot of things I really loved, and there were some things where I'm like, this doesn't need to be in the book, and I would enjoy it more if it wasn't here. Like the whole George Vavasor plot line, I'm like, why are you here? Like we'll get into that. We'll get into that. But yeah, anytime it was like George's plot line or like the hyper detailed descriptions of like English Parliament. Those were some misses for me personally, but yeah, as you guys have been saying, I love the women, I love the writing and the humor. I think there's some really interesting discussions about like how money intersects with like romance and relationships that we're going to get to as well. I'm definitely excited to read more from Anthony Trollope. I also looked at the summary for the next book and I'm like, all my least favorite parts of this book.
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
went, oh, it's about a man this time? I don't know.
Yeah, and like just really the three women were standouts for me. So yeah, I'm at like 3.5 stars, but I definitely enjoyed it. I also was very engaged throughout, which like I think my edition was around 700 pages, which is, you know, pretty
Still
hefty.
chunky.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of my feeling. Well, I think we had kind of a lot of the same like feelings, and like Taylor, like you said, the drama was just like impeccable. Okay. So a lot of these questions are going to be about the characters because I feel like that's going to kind of lead us into a lot of the things that we want to talk about. So let's start off with arguably the main character out of the three main characters, and that is Alice Vavasor. Let's discuss her. Whoever would like to start.
Julia, it looked like you had really strong opinions.
Julie's like ready to go.
Light of my life. I love her. Yeah. So, I mean, let's just start with the fact that the book is literally asking us, the reader, can we forgive her? I did. I was like, there's nothing to forgive. You're wonderful, Alice. I love you. Yeah, I just thought Alice was so fascinating. I loved, because this was like a repeating thing, but like every time she was kind of going between her men, she just like had not only this internal dialogue, but also out loud being like, well, do you think I'm so changeable? Like, just because I broke up with him, it doesn't mean I'm flying right over to you. Like, you know, I can't just change my feelings the way you change, what'd she say, like your flower in your jacket or whatever. Like, yeah. I'm sure I highlighted it and I can't find it right now, but I just loved that aspect of her, because it would have been like really easy for him to just write her as like, oh, she's so changeable and what a typical woman. She can't make up her mind, blah, blah, blah. But like, it wasn't that. She was just trying to do what she always thought was best. And then sometimes it wasn't the best, but she was trying her hardest. And I love her for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I really admire how, even though like some of her questionable decisions were very difficult to read, it was like, oh my God, Alice, no. But I really admire the fact that she was always making them for like her like unshakable moral convictions. Like, you know, it wasn't for, like you said, like a stereotypical like, oh, women, they can't stick to a decision, so flighty. It was like she genuinely thought that if she didn't feel a certain way about somebody, she was like morally obligated to like break up with them. Which I think like is arguably true. I think she misinterpreted some things, but like I think her motivations were generally in the right place. Taylor, what are your thoughts on her?
So I'm team let Alice take a nap. My God.
Oh my God, for real.
I need all of the men to leave her alone. I need some of the women to leave her alone. Poor girl. I did really like her. I think it was you, Kara, who said like some of her decisions were very questionable, but I kind of, when I was reading her, I felt like she was like, you know, that friend who's like kind of a mess and keeps making wrong decisions, especially with guys, and you have to watch it like, girl, stop giving him money.
Yes.
It was the hardest.
Tell him to go get a job.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to sort of see where she's coming from, because for me, I'm like, obviously she's allowed to change her mind about the men she's dating, especially nowadays, where like, you know, if you marry someone, or not nowadays, back then, you marry someone and you're with them forever. You can't just divorce them if they suck. So, you know, that's a lot of pressure to put on someone, and everyone's like, stop being so flighty. And I'm like, she's allowed to be.
And like the initial time where she breaks it off with John Gray, it's like the reason, it's not only that she thinks he deserves better, but also like she feels like she wants to accomplish something before she's like locked away as a wife for like years, for the rest of her life, basically. And I'm like, that makes sense. Like,
good reason.
Like that's like a reasonable thing to want to do. So I think that her motivations were definitely like, even if some of her choices, like continuing to give George money, were very hard to watch. It's like most of the time I understood why she was doing them. I also want to mention, Mariana said her whole experience with the book was basically saying, WTF, Alice? But she loved her. And I think that really sums it up.
Her intentions are pure. She just makes many mistakes, as I think a protagonist should, honestly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're in for a pretty boring story.
Yeah, like I always say that the thing I care about is not like, does the protagonist never make a mistake, but do I understand why they're doing it? And I, for the most part, like the vast majority of this book, I did understand why Alice did what she did.
Yeah.
Let's move into another female main character. And it's interesting, Julia, that you said, you brought up the title, which is one of the things I was going to mention, like, can you forgive her? And kind of like one of the central questions of the book. I assumed that was about Lady Glencora. Like, because that kind of seemed to me like what the narrator kept coming back to when he was talking about like the moral dilemma. Although I think it could definitely apply to Alice as well. So let's talk about Lady Glencora a little bit. She's obviously in a very different situation than Alice, but very similar in the sense that like, bad boy or like boring boy. Like, so anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. Let's talk about Lady Glencora.
Ooh.
I love her too. I mean, honestly, I told myself not to do this and then I did it anyways. But when I finished this, like right at the beginning of August, I was like, all right, keep this fresh in your head. But then I started Save Me the Waltz. So I started getting into our next live show brain. And so now I'm like, okay, refresh yourself. You got this. We know who all these characters are. Like I know who Lady Glencora is, but I'm just trying to remember the things I loved most about her because I did love her. I love in the beginning when we met her and she was just like this like kind of dreamy, fanciful character where she's like, let's go out to the moonlit ruins and confess our secrets to each other. You're my best friend now. Like, she's just so cute.
Yeah, I really liked her until the end. I had some issues with her choices at the end, or not even just her choices, but like it felt like she was a very different character at the end of the book.
I just didn't like the way her storyline was resolved, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that wasn't necessary.
Exactly. But I did really enjoy her as a character, and I kept trying to find the quote before we started, and I couldn't find it. But there's that part where it's multiple times we're told how she ended up in this marriage, that she was basically bullied into it because she had so much money. And they were like, well, you have to marry somebody else who's prestigious, or then like that'll be a waste. And there's like a particular passage that I thought was really interesting where it talks about how she's like basically like weighed down by all this money, and like that's why she was like forced into this marriage, which I thought was a really interesting perspective, because like in terms of just like physical well-being, she's obviously very well off. Like she's not going to have to worry about having enough to eat, and that's like a huge deal, obviously. But I do think that she forms like an interesting, I guess, perspective on the issue of like women getting to make decisions about their own lives, where like arguably Alice had more agency than Glencora did when it came to her marriage. At least to me. I don't know how you guys felt about that, but I thought that was an interesting perspective.
Can I share a quote related to what you were just talking about?
Yes.
I don't know if this is specifically the one you meant, because I don't think so, but in terms of like her own wealth. So I think she was trying to pick up Alice from somewhere like late at night. And then Mrs. Marsham, of course, is like, oh, but gentlemen don't like their horses being out. And she goes, no gentlemen's horses will be out, said Lady Glencora savagely. And as for mine, it's what they are there for. It was not often that Lady Glencora made any allusion to her own property or allowed anyone near her to suppose that she remembered the fact that her husband's great wealth was, in truth, her wealth. Like,
yeah. I liked that part.
Yeah. I liked Lady Glencora, and I felt like really bad for her. The ending was, or like near the end, that was rough, both from a storytelling decision and just how Lady Glencora was acting.
Yeah.
But
we'll get to the end.
I will say, during when they were traveling, Lady Glencora kept stressing me out because I'm the person that likes to keep a strict itinerary. And I'm like, oh my God, stop going off the schedule. It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
We made this. We're going to follow it. No, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know specifically what kind of things about her behavior in the end bothered you guys, but like if I was in her position and my husband was all of a sudden like, oh, but I do love you, and was like nice to me, I'd be like, okay, yeah. Like I would just be like, yes, because I was in it. I was like, wow. Because I just literally flicked past the line where it said like he was killing her with his goodness. And I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm jumping ahead a little bit because we'll get to the male characters as well. But it was funny how just finding out like that one scene with Plantagenet, her husband, where like he's basically like there's something that's like so sad about him being like, oh no, I love her. Oh well, it can't
Yeah.
be helped. And I'm like, oh, why didn't you show this earlier?
Yes, truly.
God. And they went on I was telling Kara this, the world's worst vacation.
Oh my God. Like who? No.
It was like Glencore like made some sort of passive aggressive comment about Plantagenet eating eggs. I was like, Jesus Christ. I also felt attacked because I eat a lot of eggs.
Yeah.
They're delicious.
Yeah, she's interesting. I definitely liked her much. I felt for her and I liked her much more at the beginning.
Oh yeah.
Although I hate the whole plot line with like Virgo, but it's kind of another case where I'm like, I understand, like, because in both cases she's gonna have like a really shitty life, you know. It's like she either thinks like, well, I'm gonna be trapped in this loveless marriage forever and have to say goodbye to the only person who maybe loved me. Like, of course, as the reader, we know that Virgo sucks and he did not love her.
He's the worst.
So yeah, it was just like I was just so stressed at like all these trash can men who are like doing like I was very stressed reading this book. Like I really liked the female characters and I'm like, all of you deserve better and I can't watch this. Like
Yeah. Oof.
yeah, we'll get to them. Okay. If we don't have any more thoughts about Lady Glencore, which like she'll definitely come up again later. I think the last kind of main character is Mrs. Greenow. So thoughts
Not
on
Kate?
her? You what?
I wanted to talk about Kate. You got me all excited.
Oh no. Kate's next, but I feel
Okay,
like
great.
I think like the three main characters are kind of like the women who are having to make these like romantic decisions.
I
think
agree
Kate's more
with
of a
you,
supporting character.
but Kate is better than Mrs. Greenow, even though I like her too.
Yeah, so thoughts on her?
I don't really have any thoughts. That was like the plot line that I was least interested in, and I think it's mostly because I didn't like Mr. Cheeseacre.
I couldn't stand either of those guys.
Oh yeah,
No,
absolutely.
That was lose-lose. I mean,
yeah.
well,
And I wasn't interested in it at all. So
Yeah.
I don't have much to say. Although I do have a clarifying question because I don't know if I picked this up in the audiobook. Yes. But whenever she cries at the mention of her husband, are they like fake tears? Is she being dramatic?
It's like yes and no. I think like she definitely performs her grief a lot, but the way they describe it is like I think she's genuinely reacting, but I don't know. I'm sorry.
Kind of what I got too.
I don't have like an easy answer for you, Taylor, because I was like, what's going on here? I think by the end we're definitely meant to think like, oh, okay, she didn't care that much about her husband, but I think she genuinely does like appreciate him. So
yeah,
I don't know. She was an enigma.
Yes, I was trying to go back and look at all my things because Mrs. Greenow only has 4 tabs from me, so clearly not the most beloved. But I did kind of like I didn't totally vibe with her. I think again just because it's like the storyline that least caught my fancy. But you know, like very early on when like Kate was just visiting her for the first time, and she was like, "I don't care 2 pence for the world." Like I just like that attitude of like a widow who's like, look, I did my time. I can do what I want now, you know? Like, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's why like I also didn't like the actual like plot stuff. Like I could not stand Cheeseacre or Belfield, and I hate that so much of her story was about like which of these should she marry. I'm like neither. They suck. But I actually like am really glad that Mrs. Greenhouse's plotline was in the book because I actually feel like hers was the most like refreshing story to read because she was so like in charge of her own life, and that was really nice to read after what happened with Glencora and Alice. I just found that like very, I don't know, pleasant, I guess. And I also, of the 3 main women that we talked about, Mrs. Greenow is the one who, like, at the ending, I'm like, yeah, you're gonna do all right. Like, I'm happy because I think you're gonna be in charge. Like,
Yeah.
True.
but yeah, story wise, I didn't love a lot of that. Okay, so Mariana really liked Mrs. Greenow. Let's see. She says,
Respect.
I love her because I feel like she was so smart. She knew exactly what to do and say to get her way. Though her storyline was the most boring for me, but I loved her as a character. That's kind of how I felt. Is like, I
Yeah.
really liked how sure of herself she was and how she's like, listen, I have money now, so if I want to remarry, I can, but I don't have to if I don't want to. And I'm like, I respect that.
Yeah. And I love
Okay.
that she would flat out tell them too. She'd be like, "Oh no, I'm not getting married. Thank you."
Yeah.
though."
Yeah.
And they're like,
And
"But
I
we're
just,
gonna keep trying."
I admire, this is weird. I like admire how committed she was to her like fake
Yeah.
widowhood, like just because she's so genuine about it. And that was one of the things that I really liked about the way this was written, is that like even the characters were doing some shady things, well, specifically the women. It's like the way it's written, the narrator is like, yeah, she was lying, but she's a basically good person, so it's okay, or something. Like,
Just forgive it.
just forgive it. Yeah, I liked that. Okay, should we jump into Julia's favorite? Let's talk about Kate real quick.
I love Kate.
Dude, she was my favorite character, honestly.
Agreed. I
Yeah.
know I just raved about Alice, but I love Kate even more, I have to admit.
Yeah, I liked her arc so much, where she wasn't an antagonist, but she was working against Alice, maybe without knowing the full consequences of it, and just her sort of journey to realizing that she wronged Alice, that her brother sucks.
Yes.
And also just like little scenes of her hanging out with like Aunt Greenow. That was who she was hanging out with, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Aunt Greenow and her grandfather, and I don't know. I love Kate so much, and I just love her realization that her brother is just super toxic.
Yeah. It was interesting. Like, I could not stand Kate for the beginning part of the book. Like, she in a way, she made me angrier than George. Well, I don't know about that. I really hated George. She was almost as bad as George.
Wait, you hated George from the beginning?
I did not trust him, and it was weird because I'm like,
Oh.
man, like I love Henry Crawford. I like Anatole from War and Peace, but this guy is trash. Like,
Oh my God, Kara, you just solved the mystery. Remember
Yeah.
when you were talking about that on my book organization? Anatole's my other bad boy.
yeah, because like they're interesting characters, and I like what they add to the story. And like obviously Henry Crawford, we both like because we think he has a good character arc that just like disappears. But George just sucks. Like, sorry, I was supposed to be talking about Kate, and I got distracted by his terrible brother. But yeah, Kate is one of the characters that I think I had the most change of heart about, because I really didn't like her at the beginning, and I think what bothered me is that there were inklings that she could kind of see what was going on, but she wasn't willing to like change her mind yet. And I get that that's how it happens in real life a lot of times, and like obviously she's been close to her brother for a long time. It would be hard to suddenly make that decision, but I'm like, you're gonna ruin your best friend's life. Like, your brother is the worst and you both need to get away from him. But by the end, I really liked her. I also appreciated her arc. I really liked the contrast that she provided with like Mrs. Greenow. Like, Kate was just like, no, I'm not marrying him. Like, you can keep telling me and I'm not gonna do it. And I also liked the role she played with her grandfather and everything. So yeah, I did end up enjoying her, but at the beginning I was not a fan.
Yeah, I pretty much loved Kate from beginning to end. Although like in the beginning I was like stop pushing Alice, you know, like let her do her own thing. And it was funny when you were saying like, even though she loved her brother so much or whatever, like almost to an incestuous point. Can we agree on that? There were so many side comments of her being like, well, I'm basically married to you, George, or like, I love you more than anyone in the world. And I'm like, are we okay here? Like, I just want to know. Like, I kept making notes. I was like, huh?
It gave me some like Mary and Henry Crawford vibes where I'm like, you guys seem really close. Like,
a little too close.
You guys are a little weird.
Or also like, Anatole and Helene. This is like a thing. Well,
Anatole and Helene, like, though, I think that one is pretty much implied, like, yeah, they were too close.
Actually.
Whereas I think the others were just, like, vibes. And I think a big
Vibes.
part of it is just the way that siblings were written about back then was, like, different.
Yeah.
But still, I'm like,
Yeah, there was just like
Interesting.
one too many comments that made me go
Yeah.
like, is this normal?
Yeah.
But literally my notes as I was reading were Kate said, no victim blaming in this house. Kate is literally an icon. I love her. And I think
Yeah.
that sums it up. Because really, like are we getting into spoilers? Is this?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, like
Officially
when-
spoiler territory from here
When
on
George straight up just attacks Alice, like she did not second guess for a second.
Yeah.
She was like, how could he do this? Alice, I can't believe this. Like she didn't say like, well, what did you say to him? You know, like none of that stuff, which I loved her so much more in that moment. I was like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew to really love her by the end. I think it was mainly like the beginning part that was difficult because she, like I said, it was like she kind of had an inkling, like she knew more than she was letting on, I think, about what George was actually like, but she was like lying to herself. And I'm like, okay, I understand people lie to themselves, but you're putting your friend like in danger. But yes, I did end up really enjoying her. And Hannah said that Kate was her favorite as well. She had a really great arc. I'm like very impressed.
Yeah, what I think is really interesting is like obviously you have the three main women and so on, but Kate is also sort of wrapped up in this forgiveness plotline. Can you forgive her? Because she wants Alice's forgiveness. And I feel like there's an element of the author or like the narrator asking us if we can forgive Kate for what she did. And honestly, I do, because I'm also like, George was her brother. She was probably looking at him through rose-tinted glasses. Yeah. You know, that's your sibling. And so, but I think once she started to realize that he was the worst, she, you know, those rose-colored glasses just sort of faded. And I don't know. I love Kate so much.
She really actively atoned for it, which I really appreciated. It wasn't just like, oh, I have made a mistake. It was like she was on Team Alice from there on out. And I agree. I think the narrator did a really good job of kind of like, I don't want to say humanizing because that's like a very strong word, but like kind of giving you that indication that she wasn't a bad person. Like even when she was like deliberately misleading Alice or like talking her into leaving somebody, the narrator is like, well, she thought she was actually going to make Alice happier by doing this, you know, like, yes, she shouldn't have done it, but she genuinely did think she was doing the right thing. So I don't think it's that bad. It's like, I thought that was interesting that the narrator's like, we can forgive her. It's okay. Like, okay, we've talked about him already, but let's talk about George.
Jesus Christ.
How many? Yeah, like it just.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin with him. Like, what happened?
I don't think I've ever seen a character go from 0 to 100 so quickly. Because, like, unlike you two, the bad boys don't really get to me. So I'm like, oh, Alice should definitely go with the, like, bookish John Gray. He's so boring and stable. But, like, so I was already not vibing with him. But then he just, like, for some reason did not even a 180, but he just, I don't know, he turned into, like, the monster of the book.
I know.
Really?
Like, when he's walking around, he's like, I could just shoot them. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, what? Like, I did not anticipate it being that kind of book, you know? Like, I mean, in a way, I appreciate Anthony Trollope for writing a misogynist that, like, felt so sadly realistic, you know? It's like, he's like, this is what happens when you think women aren't people. And I'm like, yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I also, like, I was surprisingly not a fan of him even at the beginning. Because, like, Julia, like we were saying, we both have a weakness for Henry Crawford and Anatole. But I think the difference for me with George is that, like, I don't feel like he added a lot to the story personally, because like Anatole sucks as a person, but all the interesting parts of the book happen around him. Yeah. Whereas with George, I'm like, I would like this book so much more if you were not in it. And I think also with George, like he's so he like deliberately misleads people, I think, more than Anatole does. Like he knows that he's not going to make parliament, or that he's not going to be good at it, and he doesn't even really want it, but he writes his letter in such a way that he knows Alice is going to be like, yes, take all my money, like I believe in you. And like he's just so manipulative even from the beginning. And then of course we get to the point where it's like, oh, you want to kill people. Like, and his ending was like, and then he went away to America and was never seen again. Okay, bye. And I'm like, what?
Anthony
I put a
Trollope
tab on
ruined
it.
him from the book.
I put a tab on it, and now George Vavasor vanishes from our pages and will be heard of no more. Because I went, what? Like, there's 100 pages left. What do you mean he's just gone?
He's like, I got tired of him. He's gone. I came across something when I was like researching like Anthony Trollope and his books, and apparently, assuming this is true, he wrote all his novels not knowing how they were going to end.
I can see that. Honestly.
Like he was just winging it, and it drove contemporary writers of his up the wall. Like they hated it.
This rings true to me. Absolutely, I believe this.
You can tell he's like, I don't know who's gonna marry who. I haven't decided yet. Bye, George. Like
No, because like you can tell. I don't know how well you can see the colors here. Wait, let me turn. Oh my god. Okay, so like the orange is George, and so like at the beginning of the book, there's like 4 like okay, yeah, and then at the end it's like think, because I just like stopped caring about him, and one is the one where it's like he disappeared.
yeah.
But like initially, I mean like within maybe the first 100 pages, that like early time of like Alice figuring things out and going on vacation initially, like I truly did not know where he was trying to take this love triangle of George and Alice and
Me too.
John. Is that his first name?
Yeah.
To be consistent, John, Mr. Gray. And so because she wasn't with George, I was like, oh, well, then she'll probably end up with him because like they're not together now. And that's the twist. But then when she broke up with her fiance so quickly, I was like, okay, well, maybe not. And like, I don't know. And so I was like trying to figure out and like trying to use context clues. Like, okay, he's calling him like a wild man and he's got like this big traumatic scar. And so like, I should have used my Victorian context clues and been like scar equals evil, Julia.
Yeah.
But I was really like, okay, you know what? If he's got like a heart of gold and like a badass scar, that's kind of hot, and I could go for that, you know?
Well,
Turned
and
out
the
not
fact,
to be the case.
yeah, and the fact that the scar, like he got it when he saved his sister's life, and I think was Alice there too, maybe when they were younger. So
that's
like,
sexy.
yeah. So it kind of played against type a little at the beginning, because I also like I had an uneasy feeling about him pretty quick, but at the very, very beginning, I also was not sure how it was going to go. And also, like, they never exactly tell us what George did that made Alice dump him the first time. And even George was like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. And Kate was like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. Like, I assumed he was having an affair with that woman we saw later, but we don't actually know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was weird. Also, Hannah has an excellent point. I agree. The bit when Alice took him back was the most frustrating because she already knew he was bad and had rejected him once, and then she agreed to marry him again. Why? Yes,
we know,
I agree.
I don't know. Is it ever confirmed? I feel like they maybe said at some point how old Alice is. She's pretty younger.
24 at the beginning and then 25 by the end.
Okay, yeah.
That's why every time they were talking about her, like she was some spinster hag, I was like, stop.
I know. I was like,
wow. Okay, yeah, because that, I mean, rings true in terms of questionable choices.
Hannah says whatever George did, it was bad enough to get his grandfather to all but disinherit him. Yeah.
Actually, I kind of wanted to talk about that too. More like George wanted his inheritance so bad, but he wouldn't do the one thing he could do to secure that, and then he gets mad.
It was so easy. He's like, all he literally had to do was show up and not be an asshole for like 10 minutes, and he's like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Like, impossible. I'm like, yeah, I hate it.
That ticks me off. And then he's upset that his sister got the inheritance, but the sister, well, like part of the inheritance, but the sister was like caring for the grandfather in his
I know.
final like months or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I just
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I got mad
No,
about something
go
I
ahead,
remembered.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, and when Kate is like, if he left it to me, I'd give it all to you, George. I'm like, still? Why is everyone so willing to die on this hill? George is the worst.
That whole exchange, like I get that Grandpa Vavasor or whatever was like not the nicest person either, but like I don't know. Listen, George didn't even have to mean the apology.
No.
He could do a
I
fingers
know.
crossed behind his back
Yeah.
or whatever.
Grandpa, I'm so sorry. Please take me back.
Please, Grandpa.
Pretty please.
Yeah. And he's like, that's unreasonable. I can't do that.
It just like, listen, George, it was so easy. And he couldn't even do that. I'm sorry. That got me, the fact that he was so angry about it and so angry with Kate. And I'm like, and he was trying to get Kate to lie, like perjure herself about whether or not the grandfather was like in the right frame of mind.
Yeah, and she stood up to him, and I loved her for it. Like,
yeah, do we want some glimpses from that? Because that's what I'm
let's
looking
go
at
for
right
it.
now. I love this line. Her blood was the same as his, and he should know that her courage was, at any rate, as high. Love that. And then also when he literally, it says he put his hand upon her breast up near to her throat, which is like a weird description. I don't know where his hand is. Close-ish to choking
I think
her.
that just meant the whole chest area. Yeah.
Well, no, I didn't figure he was like copping a feeling. But it's like, if someone put their hand on my heart, I wouldn't be like, you're choking me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's a weird description. But she says, take your hand down, George. I'm not such a fool that you can frighten me in that way. Like, I just love her.
I will say at that point, I'm like, Kate, I feel like he could murder you, though. Let's like not. She's like, I dare you. And I'm like, don't.
She's like, I'm a red-blooded Vavasor, and I'm going to let you have it.
I was so stressed. I was like, girl, don't tempt fate.
I know. And at this point, he had already threatened to kill Alice, too. Yeah. Like, he was, like, to her face. He was, like, in her room. I think he was probably demanding more money from her. And he was basically... Yeah. And he was basically, like... I think that's the point where... He's like, oh, you don't want to make me mad because I could just kill you right here. And she's like, and inside, Alice is thinking like, that's unpleasant, but he doesn't mean it. And I'm like, I think everyone needs to take this seriously. This guy, like, no. I would not put anything past him. What's that, Julia?
I said, ma'am, that was a threat.
Yes.
Take it seriously.
Mariana says, I was genuinely scared he was going to push her off the cliff. I was so afraid that was going to happen. Yeah. I mean, I am impressed with all of these women's bravery in the face of George, but I don't think I could have done like when Kate actually says to him, basically, she's like, what are you gonna do, murder me? And he's like, I could. And she's like, no, you won't. And I'm like, why are you doing this?
Girl, there's something wrong with your brother.
We all know it. Okay, let's take a break from George. He's stressing me out. Do we want to talk a little bit about John Grey? Because I also quite liked him at the beginning. I had some issues with his pushiness later. Yeah. But of the two, I much prefer John, which like the bar is so low. Like
I know.
The bar
I feel like we say that every time we have a discussion where we talk about the male characters or one of these books. The bar is so low, but I liked him more.
Well, he didn't break his sister's arm, so...
Yeah, he didn't threaten to murder someone. I mean...
Yeah. Like I said at the beginning, I didn't know, like, initially who I was rooting for, but in terms of type, I was like, John Grey is just boring enough that I think I love him. Like, 10 out of 10 would probably marry because he was like very stable. He's like, I'm getting my house ready for you because you're going to be my wife. I love you. Like, it was just very like lame and I loved it. But then, yeah, by the end, I was like, who is this man? You've been forgiving her everything this whole time. And now you're like, and now that I've forgiven you, I'm in charge. And I'm like, ew.
Yeah.
And not even for him to just say that, but for Alice to be like, ah, yes, here he is, the captain of my ship. I no longer need any agency. Take me away. I was like, Like not
That
good.
was a change, honestly.
Yeah, like I really liked him at the beginning. I thought he was really sweet. Also, as somebody who hates to travel or do anything, I was like, yes, I just want to stay at home all the time and read. This sounds amazing.
Yes.
I would totally marry him. And I also really liked how at the beginning he's like, Alice, I know you're not ready to marry me yet. I don't want to push you. I just want you to know I love you. And I'm like, aw. And then the next time he's like, but really though, when are we getting married? I'm like, oh, it was too good to last. Yeah, and then I had some major issues with the ending as well. And just how that was described, like I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit because I actually have a question about the book ending. But
Ooh.
yeah, when the narrator is like, and then Alice gave in because she was exhausted and she didn't think anything would matter if she like, I'm like, that's not romantic. Like this,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
this
he just
sucks.
kisses her.
Yeah.
I'm like,
That's
I really
yeah, like I do even though I liked how I don't know, like boring John Gray was. It's like he was not interested in glory or power or parliament, and I was like, I respect that. But I will say that Alice getting him like interested in becoming like a I don't know an assembly member or something. I liked that at least we see a tiny bit of Alice's influence or
Yeah.
wishes at the end, like a tiny glimpse. But yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
Can you highlight Mariana's last comment?
Yes, oh my gosh, I meant to do that. I kept wanting to love John Gray, and Anthony Trollope kept making him a stalker.
honestly.
But he told her. He didn't just like surprise her as a stalker. He
That's
was like,
true.
so I might see you when you're abroad. Okay,
Yeah.
wait, look for me.
Yeah.
He's
I
like,
think John Gray John Gray is like the better option of the two. That's not saying much, but I did really like in the beginning when Alice was going to go on vacation with Kate and George, and everyone's like, John Gray, you're going to get cucked, and he's like, no, I trust my fiance.
Yeah.
And like, honestly,
Even though he did, but he trusted her.
yeah, I mean, maybe he shouldn't have trusted her on that time, but you know,
yeah, like
I like the sentiment.
Yeah.
you like the what?
I like the sentiment.
Yeah,
You know?
that was like such a weird thing. Like Alice was like, "Hey, is it weird if I take my ex-fiance with me on this very private vacation?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, a little weird." And John's like, "No, it's fine." I'm like Taylor, like you said, it's like I appreciate the trust here. I think it was a little misplaced. Like this was like I would have felt weird. I was like, "Why would you want to go with them?" Like if you
Yeah.
don't, it's just weird for everyone.
I'm imagining like the surprised Pikachu face on John Gray when he finds out he gets cucked. What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say like I appreciated, even though this was another very high-handed thing he did, I was like, oh thank God Alice is not gonna lose all her money because John's like helping her. And I did like that when he was setting it up with her dad, he was like, if like he wasn't using this as like, and then I'm gonna bully her into marrying me because I paid off her debt. He's like, if she still doesn't want to marry me, we'll work on paying the money back, but
Yeah.
I want to do this on the off chance that she does love me. Like I liked that, but yeah, there was just like sometimes he was so sweet and sometimes he was just like obnoxiously bossy and I was not a fan.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was like, well, I don't even know. I was going to say like one or the other, but it's almost like he had three modes. He was either like sweet and like almost vaguely feminist, and it was great. He was like entirely bland and boring and just like a cardboard cutout of a man, or he was being like controlling. And it's just like, can we let's
Can we
just find
settle?
a healthy amount of all of these and just
Yeah.
call it a day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Any
it was
other
interesting.
thoughts on John before we move on?
I will say one of the other reasons I like John, Alice didn't have to or give him money, basically. Every time George came and asked for money, I'm like, girl, he needs a job.
Yeah. All John needed was like a little bit of validation for his feelings, you
Yeah.
know? Like George would come and be like, money, please. And John would be like, do you think maybe you'll marry me one day? I still love you. Okay, see you later. Bye. Like that's
Yeah.
all he wanted.
And I
Yeah.
like too, like the narrator multiple times, like, because one of the reasons that Alice broke it off with him is like she didn't think he was actually like a romantic person who like would be devastated if she like if she left him, and the narrator's like, no, he would be, like, you couldn't always see it, but he loved her a lot, and it would, like, he would never, like, what did it say? It was like a wound on his heart that would never heal. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Like, here's the thing with these men. It's like some of them are apparently actually like very romantic and sweet, and they actually care about the women in their lives. And it's like, use your words. Like, please indicate that you have those feelings before something like this happens. Like, it happened with John, it happened with Plantagenet.
I was
Like,
gonna say, is this your segue into talking about
yes, it is.
Plantagenet?
Let's talk about the guy with quite a name. I appreciate
my
they at
gosh.
least explained it, but Plantagenet Palliser, old Planty Pal. It's like,
Planty Pal.
what a
That's
nickname.
something.
Yeah.
You know what? I have to give Lady Glencora credit for. I mean, she was forced into the marriage, sort of, but even so, choosing to marry someone who goes by Planty Pal, I couldn't do it.
I think it was people who like weren't fans of his who called him that, right? Like, I don't think he went by that name. I think other people called him that. I don't know though. It's still weird though.
I mean, that's kind of an unnicknameable name. So
They did it though.
That's what you got to work with. So they did it.
Plantagenet.
Oh man.
I like that they explained that, but not Virgo Fitzgerald, as if that was like a very common name. Yeah. So, yeah, thoughts on Plantagenet? We talked about him a little bit. I think I kind of already said, like,
Yeah.
I actually liked him more, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I feel kind of equally about him and John Gray, frankly, but they almost had like alternate paths in my feelings. Like, I feel like I liked John Gray less as the novel went on, and I liked Planty Pal more. I was like, okay, you're growing on me. I like you, buddy. Like, you know,
I think one of the things that really sold me, because I was like progressively liking Plantagenet more, especially after we got the revelation that apparently he's secretly in love with his wife and never told her.
Hey,
It's
pro
fine.
tip: if you're married to someone and you love them, please let them know.
Just like bring it up, yeah. But I was like starting to like him more anyway, especially after we got that revelation. And then the thing that really I was like, okay, I guess you're a good one, is when like he gave up. Like, he thought he was giving it up forever, like the chance to be like Chancellor of the Exchequer, which was like the thing that his whole life was like geared towards. And he's like, no, but I have to take care of my wife and make sure she's happy. And I'm like, oh, like that's the thing where I'm like, okay, if you're willing to give this up, I'm on board with you a little bit. Like, because he genuinely thought that he would never have another chance at it, which I think made it extra meaningful.
Oh, yeah.
So.
For real.
Taylor, thoughts on Planty Pal?
So, if you had asked me by the halfway point of the book, I would have had no thoughts. But he also grew on me up until the very end, just because I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of how the baby fixed his and Lady Glencora's marriage.
I hate that.
And like, I don't know. I didn't like how all of a sudden, like, I don't know how he was. I find with him fawning over her and being nervous about like things like that. I think that's very cute. But I don't know, the way he was like, "Oh my God, our marriage is saved.
Yeah,
I like you better now." That didn't vibe with me. But I also did relate to Planty Pal sometimes. Like, we discussed the itinerary there. Every time Lady Glencora pushed back at him, I'm like, "Girl, you need a schedule so you know what you're doing. Don't deviate from it."
Yeah.
When I travel, I put like a specific like deviate from itinerary time. That's planned into the itinerary.
I love it.
And like the fact that he ate so many eggs and was called out for it, I was like, listen, stop. Some people like their eggs.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely.
So I did definitely relate to him in that way, and he grew on me. It was just the ending that sort of dropped the ball for me.
Yeah. And here's my thing about the ending is like, you guys know I love a pregnancy plot line. You put any baby in a book and I lose my mind.
Yes.
But even though I was like happy for them, I was like, oh my gosh, yay. Like, Anthony Trollope made a point of them having resolved this and having Plantagenet be like, I don't care if we don't have a baby. I still love you. So I was like, amazing. And then it was like, she pregnant now? And I'm like,
Yeah.
but you just resolved it, so why add this?
I know. And there's so many other books in the series, and it's like, why couldn't we have ended this book with them starting to make up and like no baby, and then like you hear later, I imagine they would have had to like have kids to, for the succession or whatever. Like I get why for plot reasons that would need to happen. So why couldn't we just do that later? Because it made it feel so hollow. Because I believed him when he said basically like it wasn't even a consideration. Like,
Yeah.
and I really liked that. I'm like, that's like
Mhm.
very forward thinking for the time. And then it's like, oh well, guess what? It's like not even a problem anymore.
Yeah.
And I had issues. And also, this is another thing, like in classics, I always have a problem with this because like this has happened probably in many, many different books where like, oh, surprise baby fixes their marriage, and it's like
Mhm.
I don't think that's how that works. But the
No.
thing that also bothers me about that is like, okay, so now we know that this whole time when they've been in this relationship that at least one of the parties really doesn't want, you've been having sex with her. I imagine against her wishes. Like I don't know. I just don't like that implication. I'm sure probably we're not supposed to think about that implication because it's like, and now they're happy, it's fine, don't worry about it. But I'm like,
Yeah.
Glencora was pretty miserable in her marriage for most of the book, but it's like, I guess she didn't have a choice about
Yeah.
that. I don't know.
My assumption is like during the vacation from hell, they
Okay,
like
that
had
I
some like
wondered.
angry sex or makeup sex, and that's how the baby happened. Because I was like, literally, there is nothing hot about this vacation.
How dare you've
so
been gambling?
awkward.
I love you.
Yeah, I also wondered if the vacation was part of it. Let's see. I wanted to highlight some comments. Mariana said, "Oh my god, that killed me. I wouldn't have given up my place in the cabinet." Like, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how I would react, but
We love it when the man has to give it up, though, right?
there you go. There you go.
Ladies, don't give up your dreams. Force the men to give up theirs.
That's right. That's right. Okay, I think I'm trying to keep us like moving through because there's so many characters. I think
Oh my
like
gosh.
I mean, I had Cheeseacre and Belfield down as a possibility. I don't have any thoughts about them. Like
I don't
I
either.
don't like
No
them.
thoughts, head empty.
Cool. Let's skip them. So kind of the last character question. I think it's a fun exercise. If you had to pick the least trash man in this book and the most trash man, I'd love to hear your answers. I think we kind of discussed this already, but
Well, we didn't fully discuss Burgo. And I
That's
think he
right.
gives George a run for his money, honestly.
Virgo sucks.
Burgo's pretty damn awful. I don't know. I'm gonna go least trash for Planty Pal. Just because good character arc. John would have stood a better chance for me if he hadn't been like, okay, Alice, I'm in charge now at the end. But most trash, I guess I have to say George. Like, I don't know about Burgo actively plotting the murder of anybody, to be fair.
Right. Which is what Hannah just said as well. At least Virgo also doesn't attempt to murder anyone.
As far as I can remember.
I messaged you two when I got to that part, and I'm like, is George contemplating killing everyone?
Yeah. Mass murder? Yes, he is.
Yep. Yeah, it escalated really quickly.
Yeah. Right. At first he was like, well, if I kill my grandpa, then I can get the money. But then it was like, well, what if? And it was like, whoa.
And the first time it happened was with his grandfather, and then it's like, but he wouldn't have done that. He was just mad and like thinking about it. And I'm like, okay, still kind of weird, but all right. And then like we move on, and then he keeps thinking about it with other people, and I'm like, this was not a one-off thing. Like, I think this is just how he like thinks about the world. Concerning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I agree with your ranking, Julia. Although I also hated Virgo Fitzgerald, and initially I was not like when he was barely introduced, I'm like, is he gonna be the nice one? Like, please let there be a nice one. And then he like kills his horse and walks away, and I'm like,
God, yeah.
Probably not the nice one.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, but I think I agree with your ranking, Julia. I liked Plantagenet more than the others, and he had a really nice arc. And George, the worst. Like literally all the problems.
Yeah, I
Taylor.
agree with you too, Julia. Plantagenet won me over with the itinerary and the eggs. So. all I need. And George is obviously the worst. Boy, he sure was a man.
He sure was a guy.
Men
What's
will
better than
literally
this? Just guys being dudes, you know?
men will literally get engaged to their cousin and take money from them and contemplate mass murder rather than go to therapy.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the character part was going to be the longest section, so I think we're still on track, hopefully. Getting into some of the like theme discussions, I have a couple quotes to support my questions here because I came so prepared.
Nice.
So one, I think, big element of the book is kind of like the perspective on women, how this functions as a commentary on women's social standings. And I had two quotes I wanted to share that I think are really interesting. So one of them is talking about Lady Glencora. Let's see. This is, oh, yeah, I think this might be near the same section about her wealth that you read, Julia. There were many things about this woman that were not altogether what a husband might wish. She was not softly delicate in all her ways, but in disposition and temper she was altogether generous. I do not know that she was at all points a lady, but had fate so willed it, she would have been a thorough gentleman. Which I just thought was really interesting. Seems to be acknowledging some measure of like strength in her personality, which I like. And then the other one, which I thought was very interesting, this is talking about George. And yeah. There are men who rarely think well of women, who hardly think well of any woman. They put their mothers and sisters into the background, as though they belonged to some sex or race apart, and then declare to themselves and to their friends that all women are false, that no woman can be trusted unless her ugliness protect her, and that every woman may be attacked as fairly as may game in a cover or deer on a mountain. What man does not know men who have so thought? I cannot say that such had been Vavasor's creed, not entirely such. There had been periods of his life when he had believed implicitly in his cousin Alice, but then there had been other moments in which he had ridiculed himself for his quixotism in believing in any woman. And as he had grown older, the moments of his quixotism, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, quixotism,
Weird word,
had become more rare. There would have been no such quixotism left with him now, had not the various circumstances which I have attempted to describe filled him during the last 12 months with a renewed desire to marry his cousin. Every man tries to believe in the honesty of his future wife, and therefore Vavasor had tried and had in his way believed. And then it goes on for a little bit more. But I thought that was a very modern passage in a lot of ways.
I also marked that passage
I
down.
did too.
Yep.
I was like, okay, Anthony Trollope, like you're making some good points.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just kind of a general question is I wanted to know how you guys felt about the perspective on women in general in the book. And also kind of as a follow-up, do the endings of these female characters affect that?
So I think there's a lot of interesting things Anthony Trollope has to say, and he definitely was ahead of his time, especially with the passage you just read. I love that he was talking about how men will put their mothers and sisters to the side because usually, like, you know, they're like, oh, all women are terrible, but obviously not my mom and my sisters, or like they might reconsider if someone's like, you know, how they always go like, oh, that's somebody's sister, so you shouldn't like be mean to her. You know, I just love that he said that. On the other hand, no one's perfect. He was a Victorian man, and there are some times where it's like, oh, Alice sat down and cried her womanly tears because her womanly heart couldn't take such sorrow because she was a woman. And I'm like, yep, yeah, sure. So I don't think it was perfect, but I think he did have a lot of interesting things to say. The ending is, I think, kind of where he drops the ball a bit. With Alice, now she has someone to like command her or whatever, and I don't know, it wasn't even something she had desired in the book. Like, you know, I make all these decisions, or I'm taking care of everyone else, I want to be taken care of, or I want someone to like be the leader in the relationship, which, you know, at least that would be laying a foundation. But all of a sudden she just wants someone to control her and be her captain. So I didn't like that. I wasn't a fan of Lady Glencora's sudden pregnancy. Now she's cured of her infertility, which, like, I understand that some people who are experiencing infertility, once they stop trying to have a baby, that's usually, like, if they can get pregnant, that's usually what happens. because, you know, they're not stressed out about it or anything. But I don't think Anthony Trollope would have known that.
Yeah.
Yeah, nor do
Oh.
I think that was like his intention of being
Yep.
like, oh, this is a happy ending for her because she like wanted a baby. It was like, it felt to me like, and now she's fulfilling her role as wife to be
Yeah.
a mother too. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, like now
Yeah.
that Plantagenet has fulfilled his role as a husband by forgiving his wife and like treating her well, now she has to fulfill her role as a wife and give him an heir. And I didn't appreciate the implication.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm really glad actually that Mrs. Greenhou's story ended the way it did with her. Like, I have no doubt that she is gonna manage Belfield fine. I hate him. I wish she hadn't married him, but I'm like, she can hold her own.
Yeah,
And I'm really glad we had that because I think that's the ending we get last. And I was like, I am not happy with how these women's lives are going. Like, just a section from the end where John is basically like, well, I forgave you, and now is my reward. You're going to marry me, and we're going to be happy forever, and you don't get a
Mhm.
choice. He says, Alice, as he pressed her close with his arm, the battle is over now, and I have won it. You win everything, always, she said, whispering to him, as she still shrank from his embrace.
Yeah, it's
And I'm
literally
like,
what Mariana just shared too. Because ew.
yep, yeah, exactly. She did just quote that. Like, I don't like that. There's like a part later where it's basically like, oh, but Alice really was happy. She just wasn't accustomed to having her happiness like decided for her like this. And I'm like,
Yeah. But you know what's not romantic? And it happens multiple times in interactions in this book. If someone is near you and you are shrinking away, that's not romantic.
yeah,
That reeks to me of lack of consent, and I don't enjoy it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's for the most part where John Gray lost me. I was like,
mhm,
get away from her.
yeah,
And I don't know. It's just so pushy, and I understand that it's going to take a lot of work for someone to get Alice to forgive herself for what John did. But literally everyone around her is like, just stop worrying about this and marry him. You love him, go for it. And I just wish he had a better I love you speech.
yeah. And I wish that like Alice had more actively said, yes, I love you. Like, we know that she does, but I just like, because even if John had been kind of like, well, not kind of, he was very pushy about it. Even if he had still been pushy, if Alice had responded more actively, I wouldn't have felt so icky about it. But it just kind of happens to her, and she's like, I guess I can't fight you anymore. And I'm like, gross. Like, this is
Yeah.
John, we were rooting for you.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
yeah.
she
And
had just
sorry, go ahead, Julia.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and going back to something we were talking about earlier, that's why I'm actually a little happy that Alice has sort of dragged him into Parliament, because it feels like now there's at least some kind of give and take of like, okay, they're going to compromise a little bit because she wants to like do something in the world, and now he's going to kind of make that happen. But I still don't like how that proposal went down. Sorry, Julia, go ahead.
Agreed. No, I'm literally just agreeing with you both because I feel the same way. Because like, how was I trying to lead into this quote? Oh, because just between like the beginning and the majority of the book up until the ending, you know, even though she shouldn't have because she was a woman and she was relatively young, like Alice had a lot of agency as a character, and she was like, you know, going against others' wishes at times to be like, okay, no, but I am going to break up with him, or yeah, I am going to marry him, like just doing her own thing for the most part. And then for it to end with, she had assumed the command of the ship and had thrown it upon the rocks, and she felt that she never ought to take the captain's place again. It was well for her that he who was to be captain was one whom she respected as thoroughly as she loved him. And I wrote, not this. Like, what? Like that just doesn't seem like the Alice that I know and love.
And I hate that kind of like one of the messages of this book, like, and they say it earlier too. I think somebody says it about the way her father raised her, or like her father says it, where like, and this is what happens when you give women choices. And I'm like, no, that is not where we're going.
Her dad's not even around, please.
He's not. Yeah.
That like, one quote where he was like, I want to talk to you at breakfast. And she's like, I'm always at breakfast. It's you who doesn't come. Like, I was like, snap.
Yeah. Yeah, I also like just have very mixed feelings about the way Anthony Trollope handled the female characters. Like, I mean, Taylor, like you were saying, like there's some really great stuff here, like especially those speeches that we were talking about, and then there's some less great things. I do think it's interesting, like, so we don't like how Alice's story went. We don't like how Lady Glencora's did. Mrs. Greenow seems to be doing well, and I also really like how Kate's plotline ended. Like, she's like, I don't need no man, and you can't make me. I'm like, I love that. So it's like, I guess we're 2 for 2. I mean, or 2 compared to 2.
Yeah, and I don't even, to be fair, I would even say like 3 to 1, because I'm not happy with how Alice's ended, and I don't think Cora's needed to end that way, but I think like it's not a bad ending. It just wasn't my preferred ending. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I also like, I would have loved to see more emphasis on her and Plantagenet actually like getting to know each other and like her actually falling in love with him. So I'm not like sad that she stayed with him. I just wish it hadn't happened that way. I started laughing in the middle because Nana said, how is this book both feminist and sexist? It's like, yeah.
Can we make duality the tagline of our book show or of our whole book club? Is feminist and sexist.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We could put that on like t-shirts.
Oh my gosh. Are we making Cast of Classics merch? I would wear it.
I would love that. It'd be all us like buying them, but it'd be great.
We're like, wow, okay, we've made so much money. It's because we've each ordered like a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, a hat.
Yeah. we each bought 10 of everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so next discussion, which I think is kind of related to this one actually, and I think one of the most interesting elements of the book is how does money interact with love stories and romance? Because I think it definitely does in this book. So I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on that before I talked a little more, because I've been talking a lot.
No, but I like your thoughts, so please keep talking.
It's a really good question. Go ahead, Julia.
I mean, I don't have like an immediate answer that springs to my mind, but yeah, you can definitely tell that money is a huge part of this book because it literally impacts every single one of these romance plot lines in different ways, because we have Mrs. Greenow who's like, listen, I got my money and now I'm in charge because I'm the one who has the money. And in a sense, Alice, I think, kind of feels that way too. She's like, well, it's my money and I can do with it what I want, even though she's incredibly misguided in what she wants to do with her money. Honey, don't do that. But, you know, she's like really making a bold move to be like, no, I'm not married to him yet, but I'm going to give him my money because I want him to succeed. And wow, I mean, like, good for you in theory. Like, and then, of course, actually, yeah, isn't that weird? It's like all the women who have money. Why do all the women have the money? Kate gets the money in the end. Cora had the money and her. If I was a rich girl. Sorry, I just got really excited for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I lost my train of thought. Someone else talk. Yay.
Well, I feel like in this book, money and love are also tied to like gender roles and gender dynamics, and also just how I feel about the characters. And I think in normal circumstances, I would say like maybe that's some sort of internalized like misogyny, believing that men have to be making the money, otherwise they're like a deadbeat. But in this time period, women are expected to marry for money, so it makes sense for money to be a thought in their mind and a reason for them to try and marry up, because that's the only way they can really improve their station. Mm-hmm. But like whenever men come groveling to these women for money, I'm like, stop being a deadbeat. Get a job, my God. Yeah. Because they have that option. The other women don't. And I think the fact that money plays into love a lot, like I said, it's different for the women, because I'm like, sure, money and love can go together because also quality of life is a big thing. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, the men who are sort of tying up money with love, it seems like a bad thing. Like George Vavasor not having anything, getting engaged, and just always asking his fiance for money. And the book, I think, kind of makes a statement like, that's not love. That's not what your partner should do. John Gray has money and he doesn't ask Alice for money. He offers to pay off her debt.
Right, he uses money as like an expression of how much he loves her. And I
Which
think
as a Taurus really speaks to me. I love it.
Taylor, I think you bring up a really good point too, which is that they have like the male characters have other options, and I think that's one of the reasons why I also like I view it differently when I see a female character who's trying to like, marry up or doing some things that are perhaps a little underhanded in her attempts to like secure a good position for herself, because that's their only option. And with the male characters, it's like, yeah, okay, if you're not born into money, your standing in society is going to be different, but you have choices here. Like George did not have to go like begging to his fiance for everything she had, just about for a pointless thing that he knew was not like he didn't even care about it, and
No.
like yeah, just
Yeah.
very frustrating. I think it's really interesting, Julia, your realization. You're like, wait, all the women had money.
I love it. Well, I think that's, I guess, why this book is so fascinating is it's because the women are like, I have this power of choice because I'm financially stable. like
Yeah,
you were saying,
and
Kara, that's not the thing in all of these works of the period.
yeah, and I think it's really interesting too that so because all four of the main women do have money or end up with money, we see very different ways that can go. Like for Kate, one of the lines that like really, really stuck out to me was when Kate finds out that she's gonna inherit the property in such a way that George can't touch it, which I'm like, smart man. Like her grandfather knew what was up. So when that happens, and I remember so clearly, Mrs. Greenow says, now she can marry whoever she wants. And that was like a big deal. And it's true. It's like now Kate has options where, I mean, she didn't want to get married before that either, but now I feel like it's actually feasible, or like more feasible. So for Kate, it's a great thing. For Alice, we're kind of meant to see like, oh, all her troubles are because she was trying to control her own money. But then we see with Mrs. Greenow that like she is in control of the money and it works out great for her. Whereas with Lady Glencora, it's what trapped her into this marriage. But on the flip side, now we're like, maybe they do love each other. So I think it's very interesting. Like we see so many different ways this can play out, which I think was like one of the things that made this such an interesting book is it didn't just have one thing it was saying about like how money affects relationships. It's like lots of things can happen.
I was going to say, maybe that is the message is like, hey, money can affect things, but how? That depends on who's handling it,
Yeah. And I think there was a pretty strong through line of it affects women's lives differently than men's. And I appreciated that. Like, even though, as we discussed, Trollope sometimes has some other ideas that are not as great. I did like that throughout the book. I kind of got the feeling that I feel like he was much more sympathetic to the female characters than to the male characters, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Which I really appreciated. Like, I mean, multiple times throughout the book, he's like, I know you're probably judging her, but think about this. And I'm like, you go, man. Like,
yeah. At one point, he literally, as the narrator, was like, can you forgive her? Maybe you haven't yet, but I sure have. I'm like, oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I have, but thank you for acknowledging maybe I'm still making up my mind.
Yeah, I think he had a very interesting like mix of ideas here. And I was trying to figure out when I was doing research before the live show, like after I finished the book, I was trying to like find some like writings on like how did Anthony Trollope feel about women? And it's like, we don't know. Like he was conflicted. Like
he was conflicted about women.
Yeah, like because he had some ideas that were obviously we see that are like very ahead of his time. Some parts that he wrote that are like still ring very, very true today.
Yeah.
And then there were other things where like, oh, he wasn't so big on like I think at one point he made a speech against women getting the right to vote, which I'm like, piss off. But then there were like also it was something too from what I read that like it kind of evolved over the course of his life as he like knew more women. Like his mom was apparently a very strong character and she was like going on like touring like lecture tours and like making all of this money and everything. And so he was like, but strong woman, what do I do? So yeah, anyway, I don't know where I was
my
going
mother,
with that.
so does she count? I don't know.
So I guess I think it's appropriate that like we're having trouble deciding because apparently even people who write about his books are like Like,
I do think that's interesting that you said that he wasn't super fond of the idea of women voting. And I do wonder when this book was written in, terms of those opinions, because I could see how that might reflect in this book. Like, women can't make up their minds. Look at Alice. How is Alice going to vote? She can't even choose a man.
Yeah. Can't even vote for her husband. Yeah, I think that is, I would also be very interested to know how this felt. Like, I was surprised at how little stuff there was about feminism or like the perspective on women with Trollope's novels. Like, there's a few people who have written about it, but not very many, which I think is partly because his books have sort of fallen out of favor in terms of classics. So it's just not as trendy, I guess, to write about Anthony Trollope as it used to be. Okay, so we talked about money. I think that's like the main things that I wanted to get to. I did have a note, which we kind of talked about already, about anything we wanted to say about like the writing style, like the narration style and like the tone and everything and the humor. Any thoughts on that we can cover real quick?
I loved the writing style, and I loved, the tone, and this book was very funny, honestly.
Yeah.
And the writing style had this very intimate feeling because he does address the reader specifically, and whoever the narrator is, and I'm not sure if it's supposed to be Anthony Trollope himself or just some nameless character, but the fact that he refers to himself like, oh, I've been to Switzerland. Anyone who's been to Switzerland will know about this place that I've been, and stuff like that. I thought that was really good. And it, like, I don't know, it created this sense of intimacy. Like, we were being let in on this secret, or like, Anthony Trollope was gossiping to me.
Which suits the book.
Yeah. Spilling the tea and the tea.
But I don't know. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, you can definitely tell that this book was serialized, though.
Yes,
the writing style speaks to that, and the fact that really so many things could be cut out from this book. It did not have to be 800 pages.
That chapter that was like 25 pages long on that one hunting trip, and I'm like,
I disassociated. I was like, I don't care.
We don't need this.
It was this book's version of like Levin cutting the grass, like in Anna Karenina. I was just like, I got it. Thank you. Got it. Yeah.
I don't know how many like explanatory notes your guys' edition had, but mine did have quite a few. Some of them were very helpful and interesting, and some of them I'm like, why are you telling me this? Which always seems to happen with those. But I also I would have assumed that the narrator was not supposed to be Anthony Trollope, just because I feel like that's what you're supposed to assume. Like, you don't want to equate the narrator with the author unless it like tells you that. But when I looked at the notes, all of the things that the narrator was like, and yes, I know this part of the country well. And then the footnote would be like, he was a postmaster in this neighborhood. And I'm like, so is this actually Anthony Trollope who's like telling us this? So yeah, I thought that was very interesting. I also loved the humor. I think this book was hilarious. Like, every time there were a lot of funny parts, but every time they would talk about Alice's dad and he's like, oh, back to the salt mines. And it's like he has to sign 3 pieces of paper. I thought that was hysterical. Yeah, so I really enjoyed the humor. I also, something I loved about the writing is just like the compassion that he had for all of these very messy people. Like, every time, I feel like he did this a lot with new characters, is like he would introduce them a certain way and he's like, and she was super annoying and she never said this and she always did that and nobody liked her. And I'm like, oh, okay, so this is like, we're not supposed to like this character. And then the next paragraph would be like, and she was always very generous with her money and she was one of the kindest people when it came to blah blah blah. So really, all in all, she wasn't that bad and we should accept that about her. Or like, basically that she had good and bad like everyone else. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I just like really liked that. That was like a very distinctive choice I think he made, because he did it with a lot of different characters, but I really liked
humanizing.
that. Yes, I really liked that, and I think like overall this was a very like humanizing book, or like perspective, apart from some of them who I'm like, I think we could do with a little less sympathy for George. But
yeah,
Kara, you made me talking about that, you made me think of the part where he's like, I wish I knew it verbatim, but where he's like, Kate was so loyal that she could be as false or like more false than a liar was naturally, or like whatever, that kind of concept. I was like, oh, Kate.
I like that too. Also, Hannah said, I really liked the gossipy bits about Parliament and how all the MPs didn't like each other. I loved that. And I loved like the part where he's talking about like outsiders. Oh no, Julia.
I think.
I'm so,
Oh,
sorry,
hi.
Julia. I don't know what happened.
I'm
I loved the part where like he was talking about in Parliament how there were all these like feuds between the different like MPs and everything, and then from the outside it was like, oh, look at all this drama, and then on the inside it's like they had no feelings about each other. It was just politically expedient, and it was like, what a heartbreaking thing that was for people who got into Parliament. They were like so ready to be mad, and it's like, we have no feelings about this. Like, yeah, I enjoyed some of that commentary quite a bit as well. Okay, I think, let's see. Well, we did mention that the tone of this book could vary widely, like, which I think fits right in with Trollope apparently having no idea what he was doing. Like, no idea how the book was going to end. And I'm like, well, that explains a lot.
Well, sure did.
Oh, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna like say, like, it's 1 minute. It's like, ooh, we're getting some good gossip at this party scene. I love this. And like the next chapter is like George contemplating murder for 30 pages. And I'm like, so it was not important. Go ahead.
I mean, that was basically what I was going to say. And also just, it's so interesting because it makes so many things make sense, honestly, knowing that he had no plan for this. Like, just the fact that when he doesn't want a character around anymore, he's like, they're gone now.
Yeah. And we'll never see him again. Goodbye, George.
That blew my mind. I was like, George is like the main antagonist of this whole thing.
But and he did it with Virgo too.
He's just gone.
Yeah, like, and there were some of the notes at the back of my book, like sometimes oh my god, Hannah just said when Trollope was having a bad week. It's like, yeah. He's like, I don't feel like writing this, so forget about it.
Honestly, imagine if that could be your life, though. You're like, this person's driving me nuts, and we never heard from George again.
Some of the notes in my edition were like correcting things that Trollope like had said earlier in the book, and then he said something different, and it's like it was like little things, like a character was like from a certain county and then he used a different county, and the like back of the book was like, he must have just forgotten.
Well, he's writing it willy-nilly, and it's 800 pages, so yeah, story checks out.
It was wild. I do think that fit with like the conversational tone of the book, though. Like,
True.
So it felt like a stylistic choice for him to be like, and we don't care about this guy anymore, so he's gone. And I'm like, all right, but it kind of worked. And also, I was sick of George at that point too, so I'm like, I'm fine if I never hear from him again. But also, what is he doing in America? Like, what's killing other people?
Yeah, all the poor American heiresses have no idea what's coming their way.
Oh my god, yeah.
I know. Okay, I think that's everything I have. Do we have any other discussion points? We can share quotes. I already like shared a lot of the noteworthy ones I was going to. I also have to give a special shout out to Jeffrey Palliser. I thought he was a really fun character and I wanted to see more of him. I'm sad he wasn't in it more, but apparently he wasn't supposed to be important.
Aww.
What's that, Julia?
I said old Jeffrey.
Yeah, he was funny. I liked him.
Yeah, I don't even, guys, like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, which quote do I share? I want to read all of them.
I have one. I was going to share the one that you shared earlier, Kara. The one about, what's it called? Men who rarely think well of women. So when you brought it up, I was like, darn, but also this was such a good place to bring it up in. So I have this other one where Lady Glencora, wants to gamble or something, and Alice is like, don't do that. And she says, Alice says, do you want to get rid of me, Cora? And Glencora says, sometimes. Do you know that there are moments when I almost make up my mind to go headlong to the devil, when I think it is the best thing to be done? It's a hard thing for a woman to do because she has to undergo so much obloquy before she gets used to it. A man can take to drinking and gambling and all the rest of it, and no one despises him a bit. The domestic old fogies give him lectures if they catch him, but he isn't fool enough for that. All he wants is money, and he goes away and has his fling. Now I have plenty of money, or at any rate I had, and I never got my fling yet. I do feel so tempted to rebel and go ahead and care for nothing. And I just thought that was really good. And I'm like, yeah,
Mm.
men can do these things. Why is it
Yeah.
such a bad thing for Lady Glencore to be at the gambling?
Yeah.
You know,
Well, she has no self-control, but like on
that's
principle,
fair.
like I also thought it was a bad situation for her. But yeah, it's like
Yeah.
she has a great point. It's like the the level of like the infraction is so different, and like that was one thing, like the whole like moonlit ruins scene that like was such a big deal. It's like they could like see her from the house, but like
Yeah.
Plantagenet was like, you left her in the wilderness. Like,
Like imagine like he's just like by a sliding door looking at her like, ah.
I know. But like some of their conversation I thought was so interesting, and it gave me like a very similar feeling as the quote that you read, Taylor, where like she's saying how I should have marked it and I didn't, but like she's saying how sometimes she almost convinces herself that this would be the best thing for everyone if she did just run away with Virgo, because then Plantagenet could remarry and like, you know, have an heir or whatever, and she would at least be with somebody who cared about her a little bit. And like, yeah, I just think those were there were some really great quotes from her where it's like, yeah, you are getting the short end of the stick here, because whatever you do, you're going to be unhappy. Like,
Yeah.
Yes. Hold on. My laptop just went into battery saver mode. So I think we
okay.
need to find a cord. But
Hannah also, oh, sorry, I thought you were
no,
gonna
go ahead.
like,
Yeah.
like going to use the time productively. Hannah said there was a part near the beginning where Alice is talking about having shivers when she thinks about the past, which was so relatable. I agree. Yeah, there were some like very relatable character moments like throughout this book.
Yeah. Oh my god, my room stole my voice.
I know.
It just gets really dry in here sometimes.
Oh no. Well, plus we were talking with great energy and passion, mostly about George and how much he sucks. That man.
Okay. I had to.
I forgot to bring this out.
Oh, the fan. Okay. I'm still trying to decide on a quote because I love all the writing in this book so much.
The writing's so good. I feel like you could pull out a lot of quotes from this book.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, who do you want to hear a quote from? Because I'll give you.
I've got them all.
Yeah. I mean, should I be a rebel and share a quote that I like that actually came from George?
Oh, plot twist. Yes.
Yeah. I believe this is George. It's orange, so it should be. I color-coded my character. In the beginning, on the balcony, he said, "In this world, things are beautiful only because they are not quite seen or not perfectly understood. Poetry is precious chiefly because it suggests more than it declares."
Ooh.
And see, this is like when I was thinking like, okay, he's like very cerebral. He's like, you know, this misunderstood bad boy, like before he went all cray on us, but
yeah,
just completely off the rails.
I was gonna say at one point, Taylor, I think you said like, this man has gone off the rails and I don't know if we can get him back on. And it's like, I think it's a losing battle.
Yeah. The train is officially off the track.
Yeah. There was one part I was going to mention real quick that I thought was so funny because I also loved the writing. And I think it was the part where Kate is at like the picnic with Mrs. Greenough. Oh my gosh, I can't find it. And I don't want to like mess it up. But it's the part where it's talking about like how the ladies like wore these like really lovely dresses and the men were complaining about it because it's like, well, we can't row if we're worried about getting your dresses dirty. You should have worn something like simpler. And it's like, our whole purpose was to be here and look pretty in our dresses. And the narrator is like, that's right, and they did it great, so step off. Like, I can't find it, but I love that part. So
is it?
You guys keep talking while I desperately look for this quote that I didn't mark because I'm the worst and I never mark quotes.
I know. I'm like the titles are so literal. Like it should be really easy to find.
I know.
The chapter.
I thought it was near the beginning.
I thought so too.
I'll keep looking. Do you guys want to share other quotes or?
Yeah. Oh, I'll keep going. I'll literally I'll choose one at random. I love when Lady. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget how to say her name. Lady Midlothian?
Midlothian, yeah.
yeah.
I was like,
Which
what a
sounds like
tongue twister.
mitochondria for some reason.
Lady mitochondria.
The lady mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. When like she comes, I love when Alice said to her, "But I will endure no interference, either from persons who are friends or who are not friends." It's like, you tell her, like, this is your choice.
Yeah. I found it, I think. Okay. So this is at the like picnic scene. There had been a pretense of fishing, but no fish had been caught. It was soon found that such an amusement would interfere with the ladies' dresses, and the affairs had become too serious to allow of any trivial interruption. "I really think, Mr. Cheesacre," an anxious mother had said, "that you'd better give it up. The water off the nasty cord has got all over Mariah's dress already." Maria made a faint protest that it did not signify in the least, but the fishing was given up, not without an inward feeling on the part of Mr. Cheesacre that if Maria chose to come out with him in his boat, having been invited especially to fish, she ought to have put up with the natural results. "There are people who like to take everything and never like to give anything," he said to Kate afterwards, as he was walking up with her to the picnic dinner, "but he was unreasonable and unjust. The girls had graced his party with their best hats and freshest muslins, not that they might see him catch a mackerel, but that they might flirt and dance to the best advantage." It's like,
A mackerel.
I just think that's so funny, like, because like on the one hand, like, yeah, it's like on the one hand, it's like, yeah, I guess Mr. Cheesacre kind of has a point, like, but also when you invite, like, in this time period, when you're having, like, oh, we're gonna have a fishing party, it's like, really, it's a picnic, and maybe somebody will have a fishing line, you know? It's like,
Yeah.
they were there to look pretty, and the narrator's like, and they did a great job, so.
It's us coming to these live shows. Yeah, we're gonna bring some good discussion, but like we're gonna be pretty while we do it, and like both are valid.
That's right. We can do both at the same time.
We may or may not catch a proverbial
Mackerel.
fish, mackerel, but we're gonna look good doing it.
That's right. Looks like Mariana's gonna share a Lady MacLeod quote at the very beginning, which, oh my gosh, some of the description quotes were my favorite things. Like, when you first meet characters.
Yeah. I also really like the beginning where people keep asking Alice, like, "Oh, you're going with a man who you used to be engaged with, like, on vacation? Like, what does Mr. Gray say about it?" And she says, let's see. "You want to know whether Mr. Gray will approve of it. As I only wrote yesterday, of course, I have not heard, and therefore cannot say. But I can say this ought, that as much as I might regret his disapproval, it would make no change in my plans."
Love her.
Yeah. And then she says, "He has no right to claim my obedience on any subject. At present, he has no right to my obedience on any I'm skipping around the quote.
That's my
on any
very
subject.
First tab.
Yep. But least of all on that," said Alice, "his advice he may give, but I am quite sure he will not ask for obedience." And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Why couldn't we have kept that energy? Like,
I know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
So Mariana's quote is about Lady MacLeod. "She had been educated at a time when easy chairs were considered vicious, and among people who regarded all easy postures as being so, and she could still boast at 76 that she never leaned back."
Wow.
So good.
I love that, like, dry humor.
Yeah.
Like,
it's
okay.
very, very Violet Crowley.
Yeah.
Very Downton Abbey. Like, I don't lean back.
It's very middle class.
Yeah.
Right? Just, the working poor lean back. Okay. Oh, and Hannah has one to share. Let's see. Oh, this is, I think, when she's talking about remembering the past. That Alice says, "Little bits of things make me do it. Perhaps a word that I said and ought not to have said 10 years ago. The most ordinary little mistakes, even my own past thoughts to myself about the merest trifles, they are always making me shiver." Yep. Yes, I related so hard. It's like, okay, Alice. Like, I know.
So good, though. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and that big description of the Rhine River. Does anyone remember it? I was like, this is beautiful. He's like, if you want to talk, then it's nice background noise. If you want to fall asleep, it'll give you a lullaby. Like, he just keeps going on. And I was like, I love it. Yeah. This is the most beautiful paragraph about a river I've ever read.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the writing. And that's one of the things that makes me, like, really excited to read other stuff from him, even if, like, probably some parts will frustrate me in his other books as well. But yeah, so that's a good note to end it on, is like, there's some good, there's some bad. I think that's everything I had down. We didn't do too bad on timing. I know this was a little long, but it was quite a chunky book. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I can't talk. I've been talking so much that I just like can't make words anymore. Let's mention our next live show book, Julia. I think you are ready for that.
Well, actually, this isn't it. This is the collected writings of Zelda Fitzgerald, but it's Save Me the Waltz, which is her only novel, I believe. I think the rest of her writings are like plays and stuff. But it's not very long. So theoretically, if we're all doing okay, I think we're going to still try to do it like at the end of the month, kind of more on schedule. But if we find that people need more time, we'll figure it out. But yes.
I think that would be September 5th would be the closest Sunday. So I think that would, yeah. So keep an eye on like the Twitter account and everything. But I think that's like the tentative plan because it is very short. I think it's like 200 pages or something.
Yeah, mine I think is like 220 something. Oh no, mine is 196 in here.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this wild ride of a book. So much happened. It really was. And again, Taylor and Julia's info will both be linked in the description. Again, keep an eye on our Twitter account and obviously probably our channels as well for any like schedule updates. But the plan is, I think, September 5th. And yeah, I think that's everything. So thank you guys so much. Julia and Taylor, do you have anything to add?
No, this was great, Kara. Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about our potential merch. So
that's right. Keep an eye on our Twitter account for potential to show your support for Pasta Classics in your everyday life.
No one's ever gonna get what your shirt is about, but we'll appreciate it greatly.
That's right. It'll be an inside joke with like 4 people. Okay. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.